So hello everyone, here we are again. And oops, we seem to have a bit of a feedback there, but that's solved. So we continue our journeys today with some further discussions, and by having the next session, we actually are already to the last part, part number 5, which is moving forward. And how else can you move forward of not talking about data, big data, structured data, advanced analytics? And therefore, we got Richard today. Richard is a RegTech geek like many of us from the Nordics, is running the show there as he does. And he told me he's going to tell me more about it later on. But now we will have an interesting panel discussion with also some familiar faces. So Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being invited to this fabulous event. And I see that it's a full day. And I hope everybody's interacting here with each other, both in the breaks, but also here during the session. We're happy for you to ask questions or chat with each other in the function here on the side of your screen. So please be interactive, and that will make it a lot more interesting for everyone. So joining me today, we have two distinguished colleagues. We have Ganga Kumar, and we have Olus Kayacan. I'm probably butchering their names right now, and I apologize for that. But I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. But as Cohen mentioned, I'm based here in Stockholm, Sweden, and I'm the chairman and the co-founder of the Nordic RegTech Association. So I have a financial industry background. Also been working as a consultant, and I'm now actually working for a RegTech company here in the Nordics. But I see there's a lot to be done around RegTech. There's a lot of use cases, but in a sense, everything starts with data. So that will be really interesting exploring that in today's session. So Ganga, I'll let you introduce yourself next.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Ganga. Founder and CEO of Bewgle. We work with large-scale data, primarily unstructured data, and work with work across companies in India, Europe, and US. Consumer brands, CPG companies are our primary area of focus, and I'll try to add that perspective on where does RegTech come into picture, and a couple of other industries there. Background is in software products, basically. Right, work with companies like Yahoo and Google. Primarily in the product management realm, and yeah, but that's my background, and hopefully I'll add a little bit of perspective from the consumer side and maybe some of the pharma elements about background. The company is focused a lot on AI and machine learning, right? So I'll kind of bring some of that, and happy to take questions along the way and discuss further.
Perfect. I think that will be very interesting to add to myself and Olus.
Yeah.
Background, or RegTech geeks, as we are down to the bone. So we need somebody to help us with the other side of things. But Olus, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello everybody. Well, I have a background of 18 years within institutional and corporate banking. And afterwards, I said to myself, I want to work in jeans and sneakers. So I went to the fintech, RegTech side. And these last 6 years, I work with several RegTechs as an advisor, business developer, and also I work with high-end asset managers, banks, insurers for the operational transformation, RegTech adoption, and around AI data projects and operational transformations as a project manager, actually. So this is about me.
Okay, perfect. Well, we have a great panel here today, and it'll be really interesting to see what we have to say about a couple of topics that we've prepared here. But first of all, I want to start with, you have RegTech, you got big data, and you've got AI. I mean, that's the topic of today's discussion. But is it only for financial institutions? Olus?
Yeah, well, Richard's asking the question, is answering it. Which industry today do not need data, right? I mean, we live in a world where data is processed and created, and I'm sure Ganga will approve as well, in huge masses. I mean, in these last 2 years, the data which has been produced is much more than what has been prior on the 20th century itself. So I think that all industries, all sectors are regulated. All sectors need data to be competitive and to be able to generate profitable businesses and hand out with regulations. So I think that it's for all industries and all sectors, I would say.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Olus said, and I mean it was interesting that in the even in the consumer world, right? So before I get into the consumer world, I think I absolutely see it being applicable at other industries, food and beverages, right? So obviously I'm not regulated to the extent of banking and finance, but obviously there are health inspections, safety concerns, all kinds of things, hygiene, things come into picture. So in a way, from that perspective, it is kind of regulated. And the other industry, big industry, obviously is pharma, right? So I mein, it's regulated both from a health perspective as well as implications perspective from the consumer angle, right? So hugely regulated actually, right, in that segment. And in some of the geographies, health as a sector itself is very, very regulated. Cosmetics and personal care. I mean, again, day-to-day use products that we don't kind of think about it being regulated, but there are huge implications on filings and compliance, essentially, right? So what chemicals do you use? If there are some things that are flagged, should it have to be recalled? And the implications around that, enormously expensive, aspects. And, one of the interesting things I stumbled into was, a regular product that we use on a day-to-day basis, the labeling in these, right? I had no idea how regulated that was. the font size that you have to use, the content that goes into the labels, do you have to have a phone number? Do you have to have a email address, contact address, etc.? Interestingly enough, it's regulated, and government guidelines are there in different places, and it's completely fragmented, right? Every country does it differently. So in that sense, there is a lot of similarity around what happens in the BFSI world or the financial world, where the cost of compliance is enormously high. But in this case, the cost of a violation, on a per product basis cannot be high, but the implication to the brand and the companies is significantly high, right? So because if you are not in compliance, I mean, it's a huge issue. And you're dealing with, again, lots and lots of data, very, very fragmented data. And how do you kind of converge all of these things that do stuff is a very, very complicated thing. And I'll talk more about that later. So anyway, to summarize, it does apply to other industries. A couple of things that I could add are F&B, cosmetics, personal care, pharma, or a few come to the top of my mind. And we'll talk more on these aspects later.
True, absolutely.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I mean, I'm happy to bring it up now because, like you say, I mean, a lot of discussions, and historically, RegTech came out. When it came out, it was considered a subsection of fintech, but really it stands on its own because it applies to any industry. And a lot of the discussions that I've had is around the financial sector, because of the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, and, the tsunami of regulations that came after that. But really, what's on everybody's mind right now, and I think where I would very much like to understand, and probably, I don't know if we can cover it today or if it's something that we'll see in the coming years, is, what kind of part did RegTech play with the pandemic that's playing out and the speed of producing the vaccine. And, although some of the vaccines have had hiccups, with some side effects, but those are, very, very, very minor hiccups. But still, I mean, there's the compliance and the data around, producing that so quickly. I mean, that's an enormous task that's come up. So,
yep.
So I don't know, do we have any opinions around that? What could have, how much data, how much clean data must have been produced around that to be able to, because if you got dirty data, the triangle here is not going to work.
Yeah. Well, if I may begin, on most of the banks, asset managers and insurers I work with, their IT architecture is massive and so complex. I mean, I've worked in projects, and I'm sure that the audience will recognize themselves, in a bank where they were using literally 200 different software systems, mainframe, etc. I mean, could you imagine? So at one side, you have more and more data because of the fact that the processors the cloud and the hardware makes and the AI techniques make that you can generate more and more data. But these data are actually not harmonized at all, and they don't communicate with each other at all. And in most of the projects, actually, there's a new concept, which is the post-implementation management now, which makes that it's total data chaos everywhere. But it's normal because it's really the beginning of an era, I would say. And that's why I think the salvation and the future of RegTech, FinTech, and WealthTech will be in this harmonization and coordination and analyzing of different structure of data into one. And I think that we're going there. That would be my opinion.
Yeah, fair, right? And I'll just add a slightly different perspective. I think in the construct of vaccines, right? So I think the volume of data may not have been that high because these are controlled trials to some extent, right? But having said that, the speed, there are two things that I see are different. The consumer expectation about what the government should be doing or the regulators should be doing in this case is completely different compared to yesteryears, right? So you had a 10-year cycle for a vaccine and nobody cared what happened versus like, I need something to turn around in a year. So while the quantum of data may not be high, what do you do with that and how quickly can you turn that around? I think that's where the point that Olus made, where these systems should talk to each other a lot more seamlessly is super crucial. The second part of it is the speed with which the regulators have to respond and be transparent all the time. So I think the thing about the vaccine situation was that everybody, including the consumers, understand that we are making it as, we are bringing it as we go along to some extent. But at the same time, the assurance that it's decisions are being made on sound data, that expectation is also there, right? So the transparency, the speed, I think demands certain kinds of systems to be in place with respect to just crunching like billions and billions of rows of data, right? Which is slightly different in these cases. But I think both absolutely fall under the call it soup tech or RegTech, one of those areas, which is crucial because the consumer expectations are super different in this era.
Yeah, and it would be interesting, and I don't know how much AI was used in this, but the whole field of AI, AI is not one thing. There's a lot of subfields, which I saw a couple of the sessions before that. I know it was talked about every now and then. You got machine learning because with big data, can help AI, but if you have small data, as maybe we had in the pandemic here, it's much harder to train an AI. So then, other subsections of AI may be more useful in that case.
Sure.
But, yeah.
No, I think just one thought. I don't want to monopolize this topic. Just the gene sequencing, right? Genome sequencing that happened as the variants were being picked up in countries. And if you take a country like, every country, right? Every test potentially results in a subset of that results in a genome sequence, which again comes into the large enough data territory. And that's the mechanism by which new variants are detected really, really quickly, right? So, and then, people respond to how they respond to. So it's interesting, both the small data, seamless flow is important as well as large data and what you can do with that.
Yeah, exactly. And to switch around here a little bit or move the discussion, if we're talking about today, we kind of quickly got into the whole pharma, and a lot of discussions that I've had is where there is data and there's regulation and you can apply technology. Well, that's the growing ground for RegTech. But is there any spaces where we don't have that today? Is there a field in a specific place, whether it is because we don't have clean enough data, we don't have an AI that's smart enough, or the regulation is not in place? Are there any fields or areas where we can't do RegTech data and AI today?
Go ahead, Olus.
Yeah, I would say regulations are in all sectors, I would say. But what's the difference is, Richard, and you're right to underline it, there are some sectors where data is there, but totally unexploitable. And some other areas like pharmaceuticals, commodities management, finance, where the data and the reports and the regulations are much more hard or intense, I would say. So in retail, for example, you have GDPR for example, but how far does it go? How is it? I mean, even with the pandemic for the moment, you have more and more questions about the data privacy issues, which makes that data is there but is not controlled or regulated enough. And if you ask myself, actually, even most of the banks do not follow GDPR because of the fact that if you're not 100% on the cloud, you cannot be GDPR compliant, because each and every employee can have a data about the client on its own PC. And when the client says, I don't want this information, personal information anymore, you delete it centrally, but it's on the PC or of a employee. So I would say there are, in retail and private persons, data is not, or regulations are not much more condensed, and it can go farther, but on other areas it's much more consolidated, I would say.
From a data perspective, I mean, are we struggling anywhere there, Ganga?
Absolutely. I think there's a very cliched stats that most of us would know. Call it the dark web or the dark data, right? So we believe, and in fact our company is based on that thesis, that the structured data elements are so few and the unstructured element is just so massive, which is where insights lie, as well as which is where violations lie potentially, right? If you have to use that word. I think any place where there is unstructured data, I think the degree to which machines can understand them today is very limited, right? So if you talk about languages, what exactly is being discussed? Take even a consumer social media platform, right? So I think while the platforms declare that they are neutral platforms that just let the content pass through, the reality is they are kind of regulating it, right? So for right or wrong reasons, and that's a separate discussion altogether. But interestingly enough, governments are getting involved, right? Or the regulators are getting involved on, are you complying to the laws of the land, whatever the regulations are put into place, and then the platforms have to react to that, right? So how does that fall into the picture? Because the governments are looking out for the goodwill of the supposedly goodwill of the citizens in that case, but there are regulations that are at play, and understanding what goes on in these platforms is a nightmare. I mean, it's just a massive problem. And even in a well-regulated or well-structured industry, right? So retail, I think Olus touched upon that. There's still an enormous amount of data in the unstructured world. So it could be people talking about the reactions they had when they had a certain food item, right? Or the reaction they had when they applied a certain cream. And these are early indicators, early warning signals that kind of propagate. Could be because of the chemical they use, could be because of the applications of the particular product, etc. All the more applicable in food. So I don't think the industry, both from a regulator side as well as from the brand side, has looked at it, as just beginning to look at the potential of that. I think in general, if I have to say that anything in the unstructured world is kind of completely wide open at this point of time on what do we learn from that and what do we do there. Most industries have rather talk about big data, and largely they talk about structured data, right? Because we can do something with it. I think we have been doing a lot in that area, but because it's harder to do things in unstructured area, we've been ignoring it. But that's like the 95% problem, that we have to address. Yeah.
So the problem with unstructured data is sooner or later we're going to have to use it. Everybody's probably trying to work with it, and from where I work, we work with unstructured financial crime data and try to help bring structure to that. And we use machine learning and we use natural language processing because of it being everywhere, and talking about the same thing but in different languages and everything. But we've made a conscious decision that AI today is not something that's it's not trainable. It's not good enough right now to be able to do it. But can technology, probably not RegTech, but can AI or machine learning or any of the subsections there, can it help with the data, clean the data to make it usable. Because, I mean, one of the things, and like I said before, is if, when you apply data, you apply technology and you apply, regulations. That's where you can really, make use of it. And, I'm not just talking about catching the bad guys, I'm talking about doing good things, ESG and similar things. So, we need somehow to clean the data or, structure the data to be able to use it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. You absolutely right. I mean, I think the challenge is the tech there, to be able to help us, get this, information. And I think it is there in some areas. Interestingly enough, in the last few years, I would say image and video processing and audio processing too has caught up significantly thanks to deep learning. Right, a completely different paradigm of how you would understand this data set. Has resulted in a greater understanding of what's in that data, right? So having said that, even the natural language is good, but again, enormous complications about that, right? So simple things like, can the machines understand sarcasm, right? I mean, it's a very simple problem, but it's a really, really complex problem for the machines to attack. So on some areas, I think it is still very hard. In some other areas, it is there. But I see even in the last 3 years where the industry has caught on, is significantly higher, right? So I again, just coming back to the regulatory aspects and even legal potentially, right? So applying it to the legal area, the number of companies that are using AI to be able to read through documents and contracts, right, and hence cutting down and accelerating the process has exploded in the last few years, comparatively speaking. It still doesn't do everything that needs to be done. Maybe it is 50% there, but it's making it more efficient. So it's a question of time, right, before it catches up and it will deliver some of the values you're talking about. But yeah, in summary, I do agree that the tech is not there, but it is there in significant enough areas that it's beginning to structure and it's getting to the points that you're mentioning. All the usual cliches or buzzwords around machine learning, deep learning, all of them apply.
Yeah, I agree with Ganga. If I may add one thing is that, and you mentioned it also, Richard, NLP and sentiment analysis are used widely now, not only for RegTech, but I mean, most of the regulators use it to check market sentiment, to ensure their policy, monetary policy making, etc. And regarding the tech side, Ganga is far more a tech expert than me. I'm a data analyst, but I'm not a coding data analyst. I'm a generalist. But what I do now is that when I can get some data that I can structure and think about it a bit, I can just open a software like RapidMiner, to name a few, and then be able to really test different type of models, etc., and choose the ones which are much more satisfying for this specific problem. Which means that yes, indeed, we're not yet on the 100% potential of what tech proposes us, and I think this is what Ganga was mentioning. But we already can do some stuff, even at my generalist and low level. To ensure that we can do things without coding and analyzing some data, and ensure that tech and human may make sure that we can go and take some predictions or specific analysis actually.
Yeah, it's interesting because you both mentioned where we are, and talking about 3 years ago, and the advances that we've made. So in 3 years, 3 to 5 years. It's kind of, it's not a job interview here today, but, it's kind of, where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? Where do you see this field in 3 to 5 years? What either what you think or what you hope, because thinking about, knowing what's going to be in 3 to 5 years, we'd be billionaires in tomorrow, because we'd be able to bet on the European Championship football right now. But, what do we think?
Yeah. If I can say, I mean, 3 years ago, I was at a big conference in London on wealth management, and one of the most influencing experts there who take 20K for a speech was saying that neobanks and wealth tech would never launch because of the fact that it's millennials who use these neobanks, and millennials don't have any money because their parents will live longer. And look what we are 3 years later. Look what we are on RegTech, FinTech, WealthTech side and neobank side. So you see, I think it's difficult to foresee, and I'm sure that Ganga has a much more in-depth vision than myself, but I can only see the fact that we have all the elements here. A tech can only launch if the supply is here. And what's the supply? It's the tech. So we have new techniques, better software, clouds, and then at the other side, the other supply is data, where there are still some things to do. And the demand is there, because the demand is that all industries need technology to be more competitive, to be more profitable, and to ensure that they follow regulations in a much more efficient way. So all the elements are there to go exponential, I would say, but it's only my opinion.
and it's a good opinion, right? So I think I look at it in two sides, right? So you can philosophically ask, what's the purpose of regulation, right? And then if you ask that question and apply that to any industry, ultimately you can potentially say it's looking out for the consumer. I mean, in a way, ultimately it comes down to that, right? I mean, there are obviously the government angle to it, which is about protecting the financial element. But a bank is being regulated in the interest of the consumer, to some extent, and extending that into the consumer world. Obviously, it's a lot more directly impacting the consumers there. So I think the frame of reference, if the industry looks at it that way, I think it'll be a very interesting opportunity to open it up in many different areas that traditionally was not associated with regulation or compliance or risk or any of that, right? That frame of reference could be very interesting for that. The second part of it is the expectations from the consumer are also very different, and we touched upon this topic in the context of vaccine. So everything needs to be fast, everything needs to be accessible immediately, and everything needs to be like working right now. Unlike earlier, where the expectations would have been very, very slow. I think these two are going to push, on both ends, right? Consumer expectation as well as the regulation on the technology side. And the other point in between that we touched upon, where is technology in this, right? I mean, it's very, very clear that data and AI are going to drive it. Yes, there are AI bias issues that we need to worry about, quality issues that we need to worry about. But leaving that aside, I think the significant developments are happening under the line at this point of time, the threshold. And I think very soon it will cross over. And then once it crosses over, everything will explode, right? So I think there is a lot of significant work in image, significant work in video, audio, text, everything is there, right? And then, I mean, I don't know, a few years back, I don't know whether we would have expected Google to be this good in speech recognition, right? So, I mean, and there is a point where, it's just unbelievable, right? So I think similar things will happen in this world. And once that happens, I think the expectation of the consumer and the need for the regulators to respond to it very quickly, I think will just push it in a different level. And I think it is in the 3 to 5 year window. It's not even very much in the future.
Okay, that's interesting. And conscious of time and that we're almost, come to the end of this session, but we have about 2 minutes left. So I wanted to hear each of you, your opinion on, and, what can be done, because at least, we'll take a look at it from a financial industry perspective. The CEOs, the boards, is very, very, all of them are very risk adverse. They don't like to take risks. Regulations, there's not a whole, getting regulations wrong is really bad, financially, reputationally, and, maybe potentially your license. So, what needs to be there to get confidence in big data and confidence in AI? In 30 seconds each. Olus, you go first.
Okay, I would say presence of the human. I think it's really the mix of human and technology that would go there, because of the fact that first of all, if there is no human, there's a risk of overtraining of data, or everybody uses the same models and then cannot explain it, and then you have a systemic issue. And for example, one of the neobanks 2 years ago, one of the biggest neobanks in the world 2 years ago, had the most exquisite RegTech technology within the banks, but somebody forgot to switch on the button, which made that for 6 months there was no AML control, right? So I would say human interaction with technology. That's...
Yeah. So I think I have 2 points. One is we just touched upon that earlier, where I think it will be good if people look at it as what is the purpose of RegTech, right? So one is to say compliance, but compliance to what end? I mean, it's not about filling forms and filing forms, right? But it is to serve a larger purpose. I think having that larger purpose and approaching it from that perspective will make it very interesting, both for the field and for the impact it will deliver, right? So to whoever is supposed to benefit out of that. I think that frame of reference will be quite interesting. And then again, having worked in different industries across different sectors, what I've learned in some of the larger tech companies is that doing smaller projects, right, rather than the massive like 6-month activity. And in this particular area, do something really small, and it's okay to fail, essentially, right? Having that mentality to chunk it in smaller segments so that you learn by doing, rather than theoretically like exploring it and doing something 6 months later. And if it's going to fail, it's going to explode at that time. You rather fail in a 1-month project and then iterate a lot faster, and adopting some such methodology would be useful.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ganga. Thank you, Olus. Thank you, everyone that's listened to us. Please continue networking in the app, and turning it back to you, Colin.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
There has been a great discussion again amongst yourself, Ganga and Olus. I was not expecting somewhere different, but I was surprised to hear somehow they tried to fail quickly, and I kind of like that. That has always been one of my favorite sentences as well. But we continue our journey in the conference, which is almost coming to an end. There are only 2 sessions left, but the last ones will be the best ones, as they always say. So I like to give the word back to Mona. Here we go.
Thank you.